Hi everyone. So today we're going to talk about upper structure triads, and this is going to be good not only for the improv class but for the arranging 2 class, because we're about to talk about that as far as a voicing technique for the trumpet section. So we're getting 2 for 1 here with this video. Going to be pretty cool. So first of all, let's define what an upper structure actually is. So that is some sort of definable harmonic unit that exists within a chord, but we're thinking of this as something that's, a structure that's above the root, not including the root. So for instance, if I had E minor 7, right? You think about E minor 7, that's actually could be an upper structure of C major, right? Or C major 9. So if I have C major 7, add a 9th to it. E minor 7 is an upper structure of C major 9. Then let's see if we had A minor 9, like so. C major 7 is an upper structure in A minor 9. However, when we talk about the structures in this part of the video, that we're going to talk about major triads. And these are triads that are actually upper structures in chords. And they can be useful harmonically and melodically. So we have to learn about them though first, right? So they sound great in a second inversion usually, and we'll check that out later when we do a few voicings. So first of all, let's take a look at the major scale. You might want to just pause the video here for a second and take a look at that major scale and figure out how many major triads can you actually create in the major scale. There's actually 3, right, in the major scale. One built off the root, right, of the major scale, the 4th and the 5th degrees. So the 1st, 4th, and 5th degrees. So that's going to be important when we start looking at some of the modes of major. We can extract those triads from the parent scale, right? So like, for instance, let's go here. So depending on that mode, whatever mode we're talking about, they may or may not be considered upper structure triads. For instance, in Ionian, if we had a C major 7 chord, right? Maybe we could even extend it here, right? With the 9 and the 13. C is not going to be an upper structure triad by definition, because that includes the root in it, right? Or actually it's based on the root, so that would not be an upper structure triad. The 4, right, which is F, that's not going to work for us harmonically either, because it contains this very, very prominent avoid tone in it, right? So that's not going to be a very good one. It might work melodically, and we'll check that out later, but how about the G triad? So there's a G triad. That actually works really nice. So that represents, in a C major 7 chord, it represents the 9, the 5, and the major 7. So that's a beautiful upper structure triad. Hey, look at this voicing that I created here. So I have a G triad on top, a 6 here, 3rd here, and I play the root down there. That actually sounds familiar, doesn't it? It's actually the so what voicing, but I'm putting a C under it instead of a D. For a Dorian chord, speaking of Dorian, speaking of so what, right? We think of a D minor 7 chord as our Dorian chord. Actually, all 3 of these triads can be considered upper structures, right? So for instance, F triad here, that's actually the 3rd, 5th, and 7th of the chord, right? But we can define it's actually a major triad, isn't it? Right? The C triad could actually be an upper structure in that chord. Here I'm doing, once again, another second inversion. Actually, sorry, this is a root inversion, or first, not inverted at all, actually, right? So that makes kind of like a D minor 11 sound. And, one of the reasons that this works is that, remember, Dorian does not have any avoid tones in it, right? So then the other one that we could use here would be the G triad. That's where, that's where that so what sound comes from. Right. So they're very pretty. They can be very pretty harmonically, these upper structure triads. So in Lydian, actually two are going to work in Lydian, right? So F is not going to work in the Lydian scale because that's going to be our basic triad. However, C major, right, is going to work because that's just the upper part of the chord, isn't it? It's a C, excuse me, it's a fifth, a seventh, and a ninth. Now, with this triad, we don't have the sound of the sharp 11 in there. So to me, this is kind of the same thing as Ionian. However, if we superimpose that G triad on top of this, now we get that sharp 11 sort of sound in there. Hey, guess what? There's that so what voicing again. It's nice sounding voicing, right? What about Mixolydian? Let's see Mixolydian. Are any of those possible? Well, let's go through them. So the C major is going to be not really, we're not really able to use that one because it's based on the avoid tone of C, right? It's not going to work on a G7. I mean, as I was saying in improv the other day, though, I play Cs all the time on a G7, but I just don't play them like this. Right? I don't sit on them, right? So the C triad doesn't really work on there. The G triad's not going to work because that's the basic triad of the chord. And the F's not really going to work either because it also includes that avoid tone in there, that C. So technically on a G13 chord, you know, that doesn't have the sharp 11 in it, we don't really have a triad, an upper structure triad that works. However, remember there's another version of Mixolydian when you have this sort of Mixolydian, which is like a G13 sus, then both of those triads actually work really nice, right? So here's one with the C triad in it. Actually, this one actually I put in, look at this, I actually included the third and the fourth in that one. That's kind of neat. But as far as like a, you know, just a 13 sus chord, there's that C triad. Just an F triad over G, right? It's kind of a cool voicing just for like a 9 sus. I actually wrote that incorrectly there in my PowerPoint. I see it should be actually G9 sus, not G sus 9. That's a little bit confusing. So, all right. What about the melodic minor scale, right? The melodic minor scale. Once again, pause the video for a second. How many major triads are in the melodic minor scale? There's only 2 this time, right? Because when we change that E to an E flat, we lost that triad off the 1, the major triad off the 1. So now we only have triads off the 4th and the 5th degrees. So let's go through the modes of the 4 modes of melodic minor that we like to play. So, you know, for melodic minor itself, functioning is 1. G works really nice, right? Because now that's including that major 7, 5, and a 9, so there's a lot of color in that one. The F is okay. Let's see. Like kind of voicing with the F triad in there. It's all right, but we don't very often associate the sound of that natural 11 in this chord. It kind of makes it dull. So that one's not quite as good, but it doesn't have any avoid tones, right? So maybe melodically that might be useful for us later. Let's see. Lydian dominant, 4th mode of melodic minor, right? This one actually is really good. There's that G triad on top, G major triad on top, right? And that gives us the beautiful sound of Lydian dominant. It gives us the sharp 11, the 9, 13, and then I have this down here. So that one works really well. The F is not going to work, right? Because that's the basic triad of that dominant. So there's only one that works harmonically, right, for a Lydian dominant. Half diminished. Guess what? G is the best again, right? So if we had this, maybe like a basic half diminished chord, throw that G on top of there, that's going to give us that beautiful natural 9, the beautiful natural 11, and the 7th, right? Now we could try the F. It's not dissonant, but we don't usually associate a flat 13 with a half diminished chord. So we're going to leave that one out for now. Once again, melodically, it might work. And then finally, altered, the 7th mode of melodic minor, they actually both work great. So if I have a B7 with a G major triad on top of it, that's pretty cool because it gives us the flat 13 and the sharp 9, right? Which are two really common extensions on the altered chord. If we put the F on top of it, it's a little darker sound. We get the sharp 11 and the flat 9 instead. So both of those work. You may have even heard something like this. People voicing that chord and going back and forth from one triad to the other. Kind of a pretty common thing to do on an altered chord. There are some USTs in symmetrical scales as well. This is actually where it gets pretty fun. So for instance, diminished and auxiliary diminished, which are, they're kind of like modes of each other, right? There's actually 4 major triads in that scale. So if we had a C... we had a C diminished scale, that actually has a D triad, an F triad, A flat triad, and a B triad, right? So all of those work really nicely. That would also be an auxiliary diminished scale starting on D, wouldn't it? So and we've talked about in this scale, there's an interval of symmetry here, which is a minor third. So guess what? Anything you do in diminished or auxiliary diminished, that thing is going to happen again a minor third away. So in this case, the triads are going to work in minor thirds. Like, so for instance, if I played a D dominant, all 4 of those triads work really nice. Now, technically on that chord, the D triad would not be an upper structure triad, right? However, the other 3 would be considered upper structure triads. When you use them in a diminished chord, I would suggest you don't make any other subs, because what's going to happen is it's going to go ahead and put a sub in there for you, right? So like for instance, if I had C diminished, I could voice it with a D triad, which is a pretty cool sound. And that's introducing a natural 9 in there, so that's giving us a 5-note texture. I could put the F triad there, right? Same thing, right? So, but usually that's as far as I would go in the diminished chord. Once you start adding more, it gets a little bit obscured. But remember, there are exceptions to that rule. Remember, I had this thing, right? 2 diminished, fully diminished chords on top of each other. In that arrangement of Someday My Prince Will Come. Then the dominants, right, from auxiliary diminished, could be notated like that. And by the way, if you're going to, you can actually use a polychordal notation when you're working on an upper structure triad. Like for instance, right there, that E flat over C7. That's really an E flat triad over a C7, right? It's really a polychord, isn't it? Right? I mean, really, anytime you have that upper structure triad, you could really consider it a polychord, right? The one in the middle there, the G flat over C7, notice that one could actually be from altered as well, right? Because on a C7 chord, if you made it altered, the parent scale would be D flat melodic minor, and the upper structure triad there off the 4 would be G flat major. So that one's kind of a pivot. It can represent altered or auxiliary diminished. The other ones though are they live in auxiliary diminished. The other 2, the E flat and the A. What else do we got? What other symmetrical scales we have? Well, the augmented scale actually is cool because it's got 3 major triads, a major third apart. So if you were to play an augmented scale, and this is not a scale that we hear very often in standard harmony, However, a lot of contemporary players are getting into the scale. I like the scale a lot. And it's just got a really cool modern sort of sound to it. But I mean, look, it's got a C major triad, an E triad, and an A flat triad in it. Not very common. And then once again, you know, maybe that pattern, maybe you could use that pattern somewhere in your playing that, you know, you might use the auxiliary diminished scale, or excuse me, the augmented scale. Like I said, cool melodic patterns. All right, so here is the recap. Oh, incidentally, there's really none in whole tone, right? Because whole tone only has augmented triads in it, right? But you know what the hey, if you're improvising on that, you know, maybe you'd use those augmented triads as some sort of melodic pattern, right? For the arranging class, though, these next two slides are really important, and Gary actually mirrors this in his book. So this is telling you all of the upper structure triads for each mode that are going to be harmonically useful. So these are actually triads that you could write in the trumpet section and then support them either with the saxophones or the trombones or both. And it's going to shimmer and it's going to shine and it's going to sound really great. So Ionian, we only have the one from the 5. Dorian could be all 3 of them, right? They all have a different sound. Lydian is going to be only from the 9 or the 5. You know, for instance, like the one from the 9 on F Lydian, so G triad, is definitely the winner there because that gives you that sharp 11 sound. Remember, in standard Mixolydian, there's none. However, in Mixolydian sus, you could use the C or the F in that case. So in that case, it would be the 4 or the flat 7 would be the 2 that you could use. Melodic minor, right? The one from the 11, it's not so great. The one from the 5 is happening. Okay, I would encourage you to write the one from the 5. Lydian dominant, very much similar to Lydian. The one from the 9 definitely works the best there. Half diminished, once again from the flat 13 or the flat 7. But you know, remember the one that actually works the best there is the one from the flat 7, right? Because the flat 13 one kind of dulls that voicing a little bit. You know, once again, melodically, it's okay. And then altered from the sharp 11 or the flat 13. Both of those sound really, really great. The diminished scale, we just talked about. Now, if you think of it in terms of the actual diminished scale, which is the whole half scale, it would come off the 9, the 11, the flat 13, or the major 7. Arranging class, does that look familiar to y'all? 9, 11, flat 3, major 7. Yep, there it is again. Those are actually the places that you can use diminished approach, aren't they? Right? They're also the extensions that live in a diminished scale. So it's basically off of all the extensions. In auxiliary diminished, we can have one off the sharp 9, the sharp 11, or the natural 13. There's also one on the root itself, right, which is good to include in melodic patterns. But we probably wouldn't do that. Well, I'm going to take that back. Because if I have some sort of symmetrical pattern that's going on in my chart, I might utilize that triad off the root. You know, one way Bill Evans would do that is he would pair a triad, in this case like a C major triad, with a note that's a half step above it. So he'd do something like this. Totally symmetrical. All of that stuff that I just played there, you could actually play on 4 different dominants, right? That would actually go on a C dominant, an A dominant, an F sharp dominant, or an E flat dominant. Or you could just play, you know, you could play that pattern up and down all of those. Like we said, whole tone, there's none. However, there's some there are some augmented triads there. Augmented scale from the root, natural 3, or the sharp 5. So once again, this is from a harmonic perspective. You know, you can actually try when you practice some melodic patterns, which we're going to look at in 1 second. You can port them from place to place, and they tend to work pretty well. You just got to look out for those avoid tones a little bit. So let's talk about how you would do that melodically. I mean, generally, people will pick triad pairs. And a good friend of mine that taught at University of Miami and FIU when I was there, Gary Campbell, he actually wrote an entire book on triad pairs. So this can, you can get pretty deep with this. So, I mean, the basic idea of that is, that here we have the C major scale, right, or C melodic minor scale. Both of those have triads off the 4th and 5th degrees. So if we practice these triads that are a whole step apart, you're going to be able to play them in the, probably these these 8 different places, right? 8 modes of major, even more modes of major, actually. There's some modes we haven't covered yet. The other modes of melodic minor as well, right? So, like I said here, it's efficient, right? It could be used over many different chords. And then once again, they don't have to both be harmonic USTs in this case. So here's like a simple triad pair pattern. I'm just going from the triad off the 4 to the 5 and alternating them, something like this. Etc. Right? So that could be cool, right? That's kind of a neat pattern. Any chord derived from C major or C melodic minor, right? So, here, let's just get to the meat. There's an altered chord. Right? That fits really, really nicely over that altered chord. How about Lydian dominant? That works pretty well, right? Sometimes they'll have avoid tones, right? I mean, like that triad pair, probably not so great to play over C major 7 because it's got that avoid tone, and then when you get in the upper register, it's got that avoid tone in it. So, you kind of pick and choose your battles with this, right? When they're both harmonic USTs, such as, I just talked about there, like Dorian. Right? That works good. We could play that all day. I played the B7 altered, and then, in the symmetrical scale, right? I mean, there's all kinds of different patterns you could do there. You could just go straight up triads like this. You could do it in second inversion. Right, I gotta practice that one. Right, you could do them descending, of course, right? Right, pretty cool sound, right? You can actually you could extrapolate 2 of those. Favorite thing to do is do these 2, which are a tritone apart, right? Probably heard that sound before, right? Look at all the chords you can play that pattern over, right? So, you're not only getting a cool lick, but there's all kinds of different places that you could play that cool lick. Here's the one for augmented, which I think I played already, right? So what if I played that over C major 7? A little bit out there, but hey, it's kind of contemporary sounding, right? Maybe you'd like that. Make up your own. I mean, another thing you could do with these is you can connect them so they make maybe groups of 4. I mean, you could do groups of 4 by itself, right? Maybe not quite as interesting, though, as something like this. What if we grouped them in 4s or 3s, but then connected them with a note? Right? So it's a little bit messy because you can't always just, connect it with a chromatic note, but I kind of got a little creative there. I used a scalar note. I sometimes did a little enclosure on one of them. Make up your own. See what you can find. So, all right. So that's been upper structure triads for today. Check them out. Use them. Memorize them. See you next time.